Madame la vice-rectrice, Madame la doyenne, Madame et Messieurs les vice-doyens, dear colleagues, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome. On behalf of the Committee of Organization in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, I'm very pleased and honored to introduce Ms. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, our Doctor Honoris Causa 2019. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is an internationally renowned writer and the author of a hugely influential oeuvre, her novels Purple Hibiscus, Half of a Yellow Sun, and Americana, her volume of short stories, The Thing Around Your Neck, her poems, her plays, as well as her essays, We Should All Be Feminists, For the Love of Biafra, Dear Ijawele, etc. She has been nominated for numerous awards, and her books have been translated into many languages, including French, as published by Gallimard, German, as published by Fischer Verlage, and Italian, as published by Einaudi. Ms. Adichie is also celebrated for her political activism, particularly in relation to race and to women's equality. She was recently named the most influential woman of Africa, recognizing the fact that her high international profile has given her an important voice in culture, arts, politics, and academia. As an introduction to the conversation that we are delighted to have with her tonight, I would like to summarize the qualities of Ms. Adichie's work that have motivated Fribourg's Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences to elect Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie as Doctor Honoris Causa 2019. These qualities are indeed as numerous as the disciplines offered by our faculty. They reflect the values and knowledge that we aim to develop in our research and that we are committed to instilling in our students. Literary, first, to the extent that clarity, elegance, and inventiveness of writing and creation are essential to the diffusion of a strong, clear message, whatever it is. Linguistic, as the intricacy of language registers, the work on language and style, spoken and written, and the subtle weaving of English and Igbo languages in Chimamanda Adichie's novels are the key vehicles of every message. Social, as well as sociological, given that every truth in literature and in discourse always concerns human beings, men and women, and reflects, as in a mirror, ourselves. Political, because the texts created by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie testify to her activist and civic commitment to the values that are dear to her, and that in the name of the freedom of thought and expression, we defend in this faculty. Feminist and gender-balanced, which flows from the political commitment, because the place of women and equality of opportunity in the city, in the academy, and in society are more than ever at stake. Historical, since the stories told by Chimamanda Adichie resurrect crucial epochs of our past, near or far, whether the Biafran War or the election of Barack Obama, and thus ask us to interrogate the structures that underlie them from post-colonial, gendered, global, and political points of view. Pedagogical, because what is at the heart of all thinking is, of course, education, access for everyone to instruction and to knowledge. For these reasons, and many more, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, in her person and oeuvre, embodies not only the intellectual and ethical values, but also the hopes for the future that move our faculty in cultural and ideological development within the university, the city, and the canton of Fribourg. In this year of the women's strike in Switzerland and of the very recent votes that aim at changing the Swiss government landscape by betting on youth, commitment, and equal opportunities, we are very thrilled to join the party by celebrating literature, power, and the academy tonight along with Ms. Adichie. With Elisabeth Dutton, Professor of English Philology, and Alexandre Duchesne, Professor of Social Linguistics, I'm now very pleased to give the stage to a conversation with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
Thank you so much for that lovely welcome. Thank you, I really appreciate it. It's always nice to walk into a full room where people seem happy to see you. It's just always delightful. I'm going to read a small excerpt from Americana, and it's interesting because I don't read my own work, so this excerpt was selected by these brilliant professors, so we can ask them why they chose this excerpt when I'm done reading it. And I haven't read it in years, so it's almost a revelation to me. And then there was Christina Thomas. Christina Thomas with her rinsed out look, her washy blue eyes, faded hair, and pallid skin. Christina Thomas seated at the front desk with a smile. Christina Thomas wearing whitish tights that made her legs look like death. It was a warm day. Ifemelo had walked past students sprawled on green lawns. Cherry balloons were clustered below a welcome freshman sign. Good afternoon. Is this the right place for registration? Ifemelo asked Christina Thomas, whose name she did not then know. Yes, now, are you an international student? Yes, Ifemelo said. You will first need to get a letter from the International Students Office. Ifemelo half smiled in sympathy because Christina Thomas had to have some sort of illness that made her speak so slowly, lips scrunching and puckering as she gave directions to the International Students Office. But when Ifemelo returned with the letter, Christina Thomas said, I need you to fill out a couple of forms. Do you understand how to fill these out? And she realized that Christina Thomas was speaking like that because of her foreign accent, and she felt for a moment like a small child, lazy-limbed and drooling. I speak English, she said. I bet you do, Christina Thomas said. I just don't know how well. Ifemelo shrank. In that strained, still second, when her eyes met Christina Thomas's before she took the forms, she shrank. She shrank like a dried leaf. She had spoken English all her life, led the debating society in secondary school, and always thought the American twang inchoate. She should not have cowered and shrunk, but she did. And in the following weeks, as autumn's coolness descended, she began to practice an American accent. School in America was easy. Assignments sent in by email, classrooms air-conditioned, professors willing to give makeup tests. but she was uncomfortable with what professors called participation and did not see why it should be part of the final grade. It merely made students talk and talk, class time wasted on obvious words, hollow words, sometimes meaningless words. It had to be that Americans were taught from elementary school to always say something in class, no matter what. And so she sat, stiff-tongued, surrounded by students who were all folded easily on their seats, all flush with knowledge, not of the subject of the classes, but of how to be in the classes. They never said, "I don't know." They said instead, "I'm not sure," which did not give any information, but still suggested the possibility of knowledge. And they ambled, these Americans. They walked without rhythm. They avoided giving direct instructions. They did not say, "Ask somebody upstairs." They said, "You might want to ask somebody upstairs." When you tripped and fell, when you choked, when misfortune befell you, they did not say, "Sorry." They said, "Are you okay?" when it was obvious that you were not. And when you said sorry to them when they choked or tripped or encountered misfortune, they replied, eyes wide with surprise, "Oh, it's not your fault." And they overused the word excited. A professor excited about a new book, a student excited about a class, a politician on TV excited about a law. It was altogether too much excitement. Some of the expressions she heard every day astonished her, jarred her, and she wondered what Obinze's mother would make of them. "You shouldn't have done that. There is 3 things. I had a apple. I want to lay down." "These Americans cannot speak English," she told Obinze. On her first day at school, she had visited the health center and had stared a little too long at the bin filled with free condoms in the corner. After her physical, the receptionist told her, "You're all set." And she, blank, wondered what "you're all set" meant, until she assumed it had to mean that she had done all she needed to. She woke up every day worrying about money. If she bought all the textbooks she needed, she would not have enough to pay her rent. And so she borrowed textbooks during class and made feverish notes, which, reading them later, sometimes confused her. Her new class friend, Samantha, a thin woman who avoided the sun, often saying, "I burn easily," would, from time to time, let her take a textbook home. "Keep it until tomorrow and then make notes if you need to," Samantha would say. "I know how tough things can be. That's why I dropped out of college years ago to work." Samantha was older and a relief to befriend because she was not a slack-jawed 18-year-old as so many others in her communications major were. Still, Ifemelo never kept the books for more than a day and sometimes refused to take them home. It stung her to have to beg.
Thank you very much, Chimamanda Adichie, for sharing with us an excerpt of one of your masterpieces, Americana. It's really a great honor for us, for everyone here, to have you here at the University of Fribourg. And we are also amazed by the number of people who have come here to have a conversation with you, but also to celebrate and honor your oeuvre. And also participating in this event, which will be around literature, power, and the academy. So when we were thinking about this event, we thought of this event as a kind of conversation. First of all, first step of the conversation will be a stage conversation. We have a series of questions the 3 of us would like to share with you and to engage with you. And we will have in a second moment the possibility also to share questions and exchange with the audience. We'll close the event with another reading from you, from another masterpiece, which is Half of a Yellow Sun, and some concluding word by my colleague. If the techniques work. So the first questions, or the first discussion we were thinking of having with you, is related to one of the talk you gave some years ago around the danger of a single story. In that talk, you really very eloquently shows that single stories constitute a danger in many ways. It limits our thinking, it limits our view on people, communities, situations, social phenomena. And you also say that in many ways the single stories are incomplete and it robs, I quote, people of dignity. It emphasizes differences and ignores similarities. In that, again, fantastic talk, you also consider that stories can repair and that we should really vehemently reject the simple story and regain, in order to regain a kind of paradise. So the question would be, what do you think is the role of literature in going away of rejecting the single stories, and how did you go in your own work with that?
I think literature is, and I say this not just because I am biased, because I practice literature, but because I really think that literature is maybe the best way of humanizing people. Storytelling, I think, in general, humanizes people, and obviously there are different kinds and ways of storytelling. I think film does that as well, even journalism. But there's something about literature, there's something about the kind of storytelling that is interested in human motivation that forces us to look beyond stereotype. My concern with stereotype is not necessarily that it's untrue, right? Because many stereotypes are true, but the problem with them is that because they're so incomplete, they're not useful. If you base your understanding of a place or a person on a stereotype, it's like it's like trying to understand the whole by just having a very tiny part of it. And which is why, in some ways, I'm such a believer in reading stories about the world, about people. In my life, and I think most of us human beings are guilty of having a single story. I don't think having a single story means that we are evil or bad. It just means that we're limited. And that, for me, it's a question of constantly being aware. So I'm constantly challenging my own assumptions about people, and constantly curious and constantly wanting to learn and to read. And it's funny because this excerpt that I read, that was selected for me by you, makes me think about this, because I haven't seen that in a while. I mean, obviously I wrote it, but even just reading it, I started to feel a kind of sadness for not just my character, Ifemelu, but of so many other young people who carry that label of foreigner in a different place, and who, because of that, are treated without. There's a certain kind of smallness and a humiliation that comes with people assuming what you are without knowing you. And it comes from the single story. So you have this woman in the International Students Office who really should know better, right? If you've admitted a student from Nigeria, you should at least know the basics that Nigeria is English speaking. But because in her mind, maybe this person in front of her is just a vague black blur. So, and it must be that people like that don't speak English and have AIDS, and the villages were burnt down, and they have lions in their backyard, and so it means then that this person cannot speak English, and the single story that you have blinds you, so you can't actually see the individual in front of you. And actually that bit was from my personal experience, and I used the real name of the woman, so there is in fact a Christina Thomas. One can strike back in very subtle ways. No, I changed it slightly, but it's very easy to know who she was because I felt that I felt that here were all these young, students who had come from different parts of the world. You're in a new place, you're vulnerable, you're uncertain, and you go to this office that's supposed to really be, in some ways, solace for you. But instead, it's run by a woman who is deeply condescending. And I just think that it can cause emotional damage. And again, I think that her problem was that she had a single story about people who came from other parts of the world.
In Dear Ijuele and We Should All Be Feminists, you discuss examples of sexist behavior and you draw them from Nigerian society. And I was wondering, how do you find that race and gender interact? Do you, particularly perhaps in living in America some of the time, has that had an effect on your understanding of the interaction between the two?
I think my experience has been that if I'm in a society, if I'm in a country that is racist, as America is, and I say this because I also think it's important, maybe we should start reclaiming that word racist, because I think the kind of contemporary framing and understanding of the word racist is a bit too extreme. So now we live in a world where there's racism, but there are no racists. Because everybody says, oh, I'm not a racist. And sometimes it seems to me that people are more offended by the idea of being called racist than by the fact that racism exists. Right? And so there's, see, I think that there are people who probably have personal experience in this, and no, but it's true. And I think, I think for us to have real conversations. So even the statement that I made, if you live in a country that is racist like America, I can tell you that there are many people, even on the political left, who accept that racism is a thing, who would say, oh, that's too extreme. But it's not, right? To be a racist doesn't mean that one is a monster or sort of a devil with horns. It simply means that you commit acts or participate in structures that are oppressive to people of a certain race, right? And I think America is that. And when I'm in America, which I consider my second home now, I'm very aware of race and gender intertwined. And there are times when you don't know which it is. And again, for me, the only reason it's important to talk about race is because of racism, by which I mean that if racism didn't exist, I wouldn't really care what race anybody was, right? I think the only reason I would care is make sure that the makeup counters have dark shades for some of us who have trouble finding our shades. But in general, I think it's the only reason we should talk about race, right? We should talk about race as a way of dismantling racism. And I find that in the US, there are times that things happen. Sometimes it's little things, right? And I say that because obviously I now occupy a position of privilege. And so that privilege also kind of shapes my experience. So I have the privilege of class. I don't have the privilege of race and gender. And that's all also intertwined. Class plays a major role. So I think that as a Black woman in the US, so I'll tell you just little examples. When I'm at the airport and I'm getting in line, and because of my new fancy pants life, I'm now getting in the first class line. But always there's somebody saying to me, ma'am, this way, because they look at me and I don't fit. I shouldn't be in the first class line. There's constantly somebody telling me to go to the other line. It happens all the time. And for me, this is so it's that interesting thing where I'm thinking, if I were a Black man, would it be different? If I were a white woman, would it be different, right? This idea that even the benefits that class affords you in a capitalist society, race and gender deprive you of, right? So I think in America, so it's always intertwined for me. I'm never quite, but in Nigeria, where race is not an identity marker, well, mostly because we're all mostly Black, I'm very much aware of gender, much more aware of sexism in Nigeria. And again, sometimes it's little things. It's that I own a home in Lagos, but when maybe the plumber is coming or the electrician to fix something, I dash upstairs, I put on lipstick, I wear a big boo-boo, because I want to create the possibility of respect from him. Because if you're female and young, you just do not get, the plumber will walk into your house and ignore you, not acknowledge you, because you're just a small girl. So I do these ridiculous things like go and wear a big boo-boo, put on lipsticks, look a bit older and a bit more like a madame. And again, it's again trying to negotiate sexism, right? So what I'm doing is, I know these people are not going to respect me, so I'm going to try and use the benefit of age in a society that still has some value, still gives age some value. Because if you're an older woman in a culture like Nigeria, you get a bit of respect, not because you're a woman, but because you're older. Which I think is kind of different for the West, where as a woman gets older, she becomes less visible. In other cultures, as women get older, they become more visible. And I kind of feel like, which I think is why in the West, you find many young women who can make the case for, sexism is it's really not that much of a problem. We don't really need feminism until they turn 40. And then they're like, my God, right? But then, because, but it's interesting because some ways in Nigeria, it's the opposite. In Nigeria, it's the opposite. When you're young, you know that there's just so much bullshit going on with being female. You get older, you start to get a few benefits of of age. So for me, it's always a complicated thing. But I also don't want it to seem as though, for me, the story of sexism and racism, for me, is not a woe is me. These are oppressions and systematic oppressions that I'm interested in talking about, because I think conversations will help us to start to dismantle them. And so it's not about me saying, oh, look how terrible my life is, because actually it's not terrible. Personally is what I mean. Yeah, for me, it's a systematic thing that we should be talking about, how to change attitudes, how to change policies, how to change laws.
Thank you.
Well, I have a question about literature. So you encourage young novelists through writing workshops, and we were wondering, why is this important to you, and how do you go about it? And can you teach a person to be a novelist? And if so, can you teach any person to be a novelist? And yeah,
well, good
first
question.
part of the question, and I have a second part.
Can you teach a person to be a novelist? Any person? No. No. I don't think that. Come on. I think there's some people who you just can't. So I think, for example, my father, who is, I adore my father, my daddy's girl. My father is 87. He's a brilliant professor of mathematics. I don't think he could teach daddy to be a novelist. It just will not happen. It just won't happen. I think what you can do, and this is the view that I take, is that you can teach a writer how to read as a writer, how to pay attention to detail, how to listen for language, that kind of thing, how to think about, and this is something that's particularly important to me, how to think about honesty. I started the workshop 10 years ago now. Actually, this will be the 11th year. Because quite simply, I wanted young, upcoming and young writers to have what I didn't have when I started out, to have a community, to be in a room. I think there's something potentially really life-changing for a young person who's creative, especially in a society like mine, where you're supposed to become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. Actually, maybe now an IT specialist, right? You're not supposed to say you want to be a writer. And so I think for young people who have that dream, to be in a room with people like them, people who don't think that what they want to do is crazy, can really be affirming in just the most wonderful way. I didn't have that. And after my novel was published, I thought, I really would like to do that. And so the workshop started. And mostly we read, we talk about writing, they write, but actually I'm also really talking about politics and sociology and psychology. So we start off, I have them do very strange exercises. I say to them, what is it that you're most ashamed of? And you need to tell us. And the point of it, apart from I know sounding a bit crazy, is to say that writing has to come from a certain place of, you cannot tell human stories if you are not familiar with both the heights and the depths of human possibility. You have to acknowledge to yourself that you're not a perfect person. Otherwise, you're going to write rubbish. And so I often say to them, when you're writing, the reason I want you to tell me about what you're ashamed of is that when you start writing, I want you to start writing from that place. So you then see human beings as human beings. Right? You don't see them as ideological puppets. You see that people are complicated, that somebody who can be deeply kind to someone can also be terribly racist to someone else. That's what human beings do. And for me, it's important that we talk about ourselves before we start to, tell stories. So we talk about that. We talk about politics. We talk about structures. We talk about, in Nigeria, it's classism, it's sexism, there's regionalism. I ask them questions about the stereotypes they have about people from the North. What does it mean? Where did it come from? So really, a friend of mine who visited the workshop some years ago said to me, actually, this is not so much about writing. This is about what you're doing here is social engineering. Which despite I know that social engineering can sound, especially in this area with Germany next door, but I don't mean it in that way. I think what he meant was that it's a workshop that acknowledges that writing doesn't fall from the sky, that writing, storytelling is rooted in our political, our social, our emotional realities, and that we need to talk about those things as well. So we don't only talk about the rhythm of sentences, although that's important. We also talk about what they're ashamed of. And one thing that makes me very happy is that afterwards, it becomes a community of people. They support one another. And I then end up having to write way too many recommendation letters for graduate school. It's terrible. That's the only downside. But I don't think I'm teaching them how to write. I think these are people who already are very talented. But I think that maybe what the workshop does is that it gives them confidence, and it starts to help them to see what it's like to send your work out into the world, because it's quite difficult. Many of them have never been read by other people or have been read only by their friends, and then they come in and you have a room full of 20 people reading your work and talking about it, and it can be difficult. But it's part of the territory. If you want to write, you have to know that that's how it works. That there's somebody going to say, I don't understand the story. I don't think the story works. And you might have to go to the bathroom and cry, but it's part of the territory, yes.
So thank you so much. If you had one advice to give to somebody, to young people who would like to become novelists, what would it be?
Don't tell your parents. Don't. Parents, I know parents are like, what? But don't. Because parents love you, and they are going to think about how you're going to pay your rent, earn a living. But two things I would say is, it's important to try. I'm a great believer in trying. You just never know. And so, yes, I don't know what the statistics are for success as a novelist, but it's probably not the most encouraging statistics. But you won't know until you try. And so I think for a young person who has a dream of being a writer, I would say try. And trying means you have to read. You have to really read. I don't think it's possible to be a good writer if you're not a good reader. And then you have to write, because it's actually work. And you have to be willing to give up time for it. You cannot have, in my opinion, the kind of full life and also write the best that you can. Something has to give. When I was an undergrad, I remember I didn't hang out, I didn't go to bars, because I wanted to write. I wanted to save the time to write, because that was the thing that gave me my high, writing. So if writing doesn't give you your high, then I don't see why you should do it. People are kind of solemn. Is talking about drugs in a tangential way bad in Switzerland? Okay. All right, so instead of high, what makes you happy? And the other thing I would say is, read and write and try. And I would say, if possible, keep your day job. And write at night. Because I think it's too much pressure even on your talent to want to make it earn your living for you right away. I mean, it can be too much. And I think rejection comes with the territory of writing. I remember when I started trying to be published and I got so many rejections. And I think had I depended on that to pay my rent, I probably might have stopped writing. But what I was doing is I was babysitting so I could pay my rent and write. So I would suggest keeping the day job.
Thank you so much.
Another question about when you began writing. You talk about how you first read about snow and apples. And so when you started writing, you wrote about snow and apples instead of about mangoes and sunshine, which were your experience. So do you think, in that situation, what was it that gave you a sense of vocation as a writer? And was it in some way a kind of reaction against that experience, do you think?
That's actually interesting. I don't know. I like to think that my ancestors brought me to the world to tell stories. I really do believe that this is why I'm here. And at the risk of sounding a little precious, but it's because the urge to tell stories is something I've always had. I don't remember when I didn't have it. But then telling the stories that were not mine, I think just happened to be a consequence of the books I was exposed to. I think had I started off reading books about Nigerians rather than books about British kids and American kids, I probably would have written the same stories I was reading. So I don't really know if it's hard to say what was how much of my, it's really hard. It's also really hard for me to talk about creative motivations because I don't always know. Why did I decide that writing really was the thing? Was it because I read Enid Blyton when I was 6? I don't know, right? I really don't know. And increasingly, I don't even want to talk about writing literature because it feels like I'm being made to be my own therapist,
Well, I will ask one more question about your voice, not about your motivation for writing then. In Americana, you treat the topic of different kinds of English. And your central character consciously decides not to speak American English. So do you think of yourself as speaking, or indeed as writing, in Nigerian English, American English, British English? Or does it even matter, do you think?
I don't think I think about it consciously, but I do feel that I've become a kind of mongrel of Englishes. And I like to think that my work reflects the English that I'm familiar with, which is a certain kind of Nigerian English, African English, but also because class always plays a role in these things. So it's also an educated Nigerian English, right? So, but it's also an English that's deeply flavored by Igbo, the other language I speak. But I think that idea of being, in some ways, and I think I was telling you earlier how fascinated I am by this wonderful Swiss penchant for multiple languages, which languages fascinate me because I think we become different people, different versions of ourselves, and we speak different languages. When I speak Igbo, I think for me, it's very informal. It's a language of love and laughter. I'm from the Wuni Wineba, when I what I fed Nasukita. One name work a kedu ni kwenu. So it's warm that my and then there's the other English I speak, which is when I go to the market in Lagos. This I start to talk like this. How much is this thing now? Why is it not cheaper now? I don't want to give me. That's another English, right? It's a class-based English. And then when I speak Pidgin as well. And then when I am in places like this, when I have to be proper and educated, I speak like this. And I call this my Mr. Abo English. Mr. Abo was my English teacher in secondary school. And he used to do this thing where he would bring a radio and turn the BBC on and then have us talk. And then he'd be like, listen, you need to sound like that. And then we're all there thinking, but we don't know how to. And he's like, no, repeat that word. No. Say it again. So Mr. Bo is always in my head when I'm doing this. When I get back to the hotel with my brother, we'll switch. We'll speak Igbo and we'll speak a Nigerian English. When I get back to Lagos and my driver picks me up, I switch to another version of English. If I go to my ancestral hometown, I speak an English that has more Igbo in it. So it's constantly, and what I want to try and do in my fiction is to try and capture that. So it's kind of why I throw in bits of Igbo words in the dialogue. Sometimes I make the dialogue in English that one might call intentionally awkward, but it's really just to capture that Nigerian, that, I don't know, the multipleness of the Englishes in my world.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, the American bit. Yes, so when I first went to the US, in some ways like Ifemelo. I mean, I didn't quite practice an American accent like Ifemelo does in the novel, but I did deliberately mimic an American accent because I think that when you're in a new place, you're vulnerable, you feel that people are looking down on you, that the thing you least want is to be different. Mm-hmm. And so I found myself then saying, can I have some water? Because then Americans don't look at you in a strange way, and then they don't talk to you in that slow, condescending tone. I did that for a while, and apparently I'm told that I did a fairly good American. But I remember just waking up one day and thinking, what accent will I have if I am told that I'm in a room, the door is locked, and there's a fire? You know, am I going to say, there's a fire? Or am I going to say, there's a fire? I would say there's a fire. So I thought I'm going to use the energy that I have instead of sort of pretending to speak the way that's just takes up walk. I'm going to use that energy and write my fiction, and I'm going to talk in a way that's more natural to me. So that's why I made the decision to stop doing the American accent. But at the same time, I completely understand how people who go to a new place take on, the code switch to be a little less different. And I think in the end, it's really about human beings looking for ways to find dignity. Because if sounding a particular way means that somebody's going to look down on you, then you make the choice to change how you sound so that you can just have a little bit of human dignity.
Thank you.
So, still about literature and writing, how do you actually go about writing? Do you write in your pajamas in the morning? Do you write at the desk? Do you write with a pen or directly on the laptop? Do you write drinking coffee? And do you give yourself rules like, I have to write 500 words a day? Or do you know when you begin a novel, do you know how it is going to end?
No. When I begin a novel, I don't know how it's going to end, and I don't want to know. I think for me, I have a general sense of what I want to do. I like to call it that the spirits are talking to me. But sometimes I imagine something will happen and then it doesn't, if that makes sense. So Half of a Yellow Sun ended in a way that I hadn't quite planned for it to end, because I started it and things just happened. It's true. I cannot tell you where I write. We'll just leave it mysterious.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you is that I wish I had a schedule. I remember reading about John Cheever, who apparently every morning would dress up, take the elevator down to the basement of his apartment building in New York City, have a typewriter there, write, and then at 4 p.m. take the elevator back to his apartment. And when I read that, I thought, my God, how? So did he actually write what was useful every day? Because I don't know how that happens. I write when it comes. I wish it came more often. I don't have a word count. When it's going well, I'm deeply immersed. And I'm also quite obsessive, and you know, I become consumed really when my writing is going well, and it's like it really is when the writing is going well, when fiction is going well, because it's quite different for nonfiction. But for me, when fiction is going well, I feel that I'm transported. I feel just so exquisitely happy. But alas, it never lasts. So I don't have a pattern, or there are times when I want to, really, for me, the only requirement is silence and space and light. I like light.
Thank you. And
somebody bringing me food.
Question, but
it's true.
There are obviously elements of autobiography in your novels.
Yeah.
So how do you invest yourself in your writing?
I'm not necessarily precious about the idea of the autobiographical in fiction, because I think that all fiction is autobiographical. If not in a literal way, then surely in a more figurative way. We bring ourselves and our worldview and our interests to our fiction. In general, I borrow from my life, but because my life is actually not that interesting, I tweak. I borrow from my life, but I tweak. So the excerpt that I read, there was somebody like Christina Thomas. She did speak to me in this very condescending manner. I didn't quite react like Ifemelu. Ifemelu's reaction, I made a bit more dramatic because it's just a more interesting reaction. I just sulked for a few days. But Ifemelu is just more, she does more. So it's again, not always conscious. Things happen and I take notes and I don't know how I'll use them. Because again, for me, it's not an entirely conscious process, fiction. I think that if anything, it's less, maybe what is most autobiographical, I think, is the emotional landscape of my fiction. Not so much the things that happened, but that feeling of just trying to mine what it feels like to be, to long for something. That feeling of wondering if there's another life somewhere that's better than the life you have, which is something I feel very familiar with. And I think that a lot of my fiction is really about that, a kind of longing.
Thank you so much.
Maybe just to conclude with the last question from our side before giving the floor to the audience. You are a writer, an artist, but also a kind of public intellectual. You are engaging also with academia in many ways, like giving talks, receiving honorary doctorate. This is not the only one here. I mean, some people were giving you honorary doctorate from other places. And we were just wondering, what do you think about academia and about its role, or useless maybe, while challenging or questioning issues of race, class, gender, or other issues of current contemporary societies?
You really want to know what I think?
Yeah, please.
you've been very kind to me and been and you've been such good hosts. Okay, I'll tell you what. Well, first of all, so having grown up on a university campus, academia is very familiar to me. And whenever I'm in a university environment or setting, I just feel instantly at home. And it doesn't matter where in the world. I think it's just that idea of being in a space that is dedicated to learning. And because I grew up in that, I just feel at home. But at the same time, I do have concerns and criticisms about a certain kind of contemporary academia. And I can really only speak for the US because that's what I know well. There is a sense in which, and maybe it's a kind of disappointment, the kind of disappointment that comes from love. And so I feel that academia is becoming increasingly inward-looking. So when I was in graduate school, for example, there were many books that I just thought were full of jargon. I didn't even understand half of them, especially political science. And the reason this frustrated me is that I thought these are such brilliant people in academia. And it's almost as though the way that academia is structured, they are no longer able to really engage with the world outside of academia, which in my opinion is where they're most needed. We live in a world of, we live now in a world of kind of low information, low understanding. And it seems to me that if you look at, so reading academic papers from 1965 and reading academic papers from 2019, the difference is jarring. The use of language, years ago it was much clearer. It didn't feel as, it didn't feel as though those papers were being written for two people, the thesis supervisor and the former thesis supervisor, right? And I really think, because I'm just a believer in knowledge, and I feel as though academics, because, to get to the point where you're in a university, you've done so much work. There's a lot of knowledge there. There's so much to give back. And I feel as though it's not quite being done, especially in the US. And it's not about individuals. I think it's about, again, I think it's structural. I'm not sure how much of it is about the American education system being so mired in money. So there's a kind of, I don't know, I almost feel as though there's a rigor that's lost. There's I think part of it is the idea that students are kind of now clients. Students pay you, right? And therefore you owe them a certain kind of ease. And on the other hand, you want to get tenure. So you cannot write for the public because then your thesis supervisor will be like, this is too simple. You don't have enough jargon in here. You're not going to get tenure. So I don't know how much of all of these things are linked to sort of a larger kind of just, I don't know, financial system. But, so yes, those are my, I wish that academia would be less jargony, be more, because here's the other thing I find, that when I meet academics, talking to them, I'm fascinated. I find them so interesting. Their ideas are interesting. Then I go and read their papers. I'm like, what is going on? And so that's when you start to see that, the certain, unfortunately, some academics, I think, have to play the game the way it's played. You have to think about and I experienced a bit of it when I was in graduate school, and I remember thinking, academia is not for me, because I had kind of thought briefly that I would go on and do a PhD. But after doing the master's, I thought, I can't do this because I just really I felt constricted. I felt, it wasn't the most, that said, for the students here, please keep going to class.
Thank you.
There's still some good things about it. But really, I think, but again, this criticism is coming from a place of thinking that that academia deeply matters, that intellectualism has to be a central part of any society that wants to function, that the discussion of ideas, that ideas have to be part of the world that we create, that we should be able to talk about ideas, to discuss ideas. I also think that academia in the US, I don't know how much it's happening here and in Europe in general, but there's also, I think, a kind of fear. When I talk to young students, I often say to them, are you afraid of saying the wrong thing? And invariably they say yes. So there's a kind, I think, of space that's been created in academia where curiosity is dead. You can no longer be curious. You should know it all already. And there are consequences for not knowing it all already. And I think that's also really harmful to just the idea of ideas. And again, I don't know how much of this is about people so afraid of possible consequences. Are you going to lose your job? Does your university not want to upset anybody? So if you don't want to upset anybody, it means that you have to be in a certain kind of middle ground where, I read some academic papers at the end, I'm like, I don't even know what the argument is. But I'm reading it thinking, this person writing it knows what the argument is, but in this person's head is that thesis supervisor or that grant that they may not get. There's just, I don't know, and I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but all right, I'll stop now. I'll stop now.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we invite questions from the floor. Can we ask you to shout really loudly? Because, we do have the microphones. Excellent. I thought for an awful moment we didn't, but we do. So wave your arms and our wonderful helpers will come and catch you. Marion, were you going to, or do you want me to?
Yeah, so I think it was first here.
Okay,
so first it was here.
Thank you so much for being here. You can't imagine how much it means to me. Thank you so much. My question is about religion. I remember that Ifeolu's mom was really religious, and I just thought about Trevor Noah's book, where he picked the religion thing also, or it was also very important for Trevor Noah's mom. And I was wondering, what were your reflections about it? What's the link between religion and race in Americana, or maybe in society in general?
Well, thank you for being here. I have to say, every time, every event I have, I feel as though I have sort of a core of incredible Black women who are my guardian angels. And it's true. It's true. So, I feel as though if I did an event in, I don't know, Greenland, there would be a core of Black women somewhere that, no, it's true. And it's always very meaningful to me. And they're always gorgeous and mostly have just the most incredible hair. So thank you. Thank you. It also means a lot to me to see you. Religion obviously is important, I think, for Africa. And I think statistics, I think what they're saying is Africa is really the frontier now of Christianity, especially Pentecostal Christianity. So Ifeolu's mother is a kind of, her religion, she represents a type. She's a type. It's a type that's very familiar in Nigeria. You hop from church to church. God is sort of, it's very prosperity focused. Wealth is a blessing, that kind of thing. And I think in the way that you can tell a writer's worldview, I think it's clear that the writer of Americana is not very keen on Ifeolu's mother's version of religion. Because I just deeply oppose the idea of prosperity as a Christian virtue. Because I just think it's very problematic, because then it means that There are people living in structures and societies that make it almost impossible to rise up against poverty. And then somehow you tell them that poverty is from the devil. So in some ways, you're making them complicit in something that's not their fault. So I really have a problem with that. But in general, I also respect religion. I think religion can be a force for good. So I grew up Catholic. My father is a very devoted Catholic, and I find my father's faith quite beautiful because it's moderate and wise and kind. And increasingly for me, in thinking about feminism, I've actually started studying the Bible. Now, this is a bit strange, but I'm doing it because you cannot engage with women on the continent of Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, if you're unwilling to engage with Christianity. It's just not going to happen. And so a lot of, in talking to women, often it's religion that creates the language of misogyny. It's religion that, in my opinion, that people use and people manipulate. And so what I want to do now, and please, I want African women who want to join me, please, in this Bible study for feminism, is to find ways, because scripture is often used to justify sexism, and because I don't believe that Christianity is sexist, I want to find ways to use that same scripture to push back. And so one of the stories I love to tell whenever I'm in Nigeria is, and then I adopt my Nigerian persona, so I'm going to do it now for you. Okay, what is the most important part of Christianity? It's not Christmas, so it is Easter. Because if Jesus Christ did not rise from the dead, there's no point in our faith. Okay, so when Jesus rose from the dead, who was the first person that saw Jesus? Was it a man or a woman? So we have to, and I say this, and I'm kind of laughing, but I'm really not laughing. What I mean is, if you really, and I think just the story of Jesus Christ, and it doesn't matter whether one thinks of it in a spiritual way, I think it's a very inspirational, very moving story of a man who, were he alive today, people would call a crazy hippie. A man who, growing up, living in a world that was quite structured and very clear about rules, broke them all. You don't associate with tax collectors and sinners. Well, he did. You don't really talk to women. Oh, he hangs out with Martha and Mary. You don't. So oh, look, she committed adultery, and it's like, who here is without sin? So for me, in thinking about Jesus Christ, really, if we take away all of the things that religion has put on Christianity, for me, it's about a certain kind of equality of human beings. It's that people are people, which is really what feminism is. And so I really do feel that religion it has to be part of the conversation in Africa, because it's impossible, and I think also other conversations about social oppressions, we need to make religion part of it. Otherwise, you lose people. You just lose people, because religion is such a central part of people's lives and has meaning for people, apart from the parts that are kind of messed up, but has real meaning for people and gives meaning to them. So I'm starting my Bible study. And please join me. There's a woman. Okay, there's a woman in front in black here. Oh, I'm so sorry. No, it's all right. No, he can go and then she can go next. No, I'll be very quick. No, we need to be inclusive.
Yes, I appreciate it. I just want to say thank you. I have a question about form. As in the introduction, you mentioned you wrote poetry, and I read on Wikipedia that you also wrote a stage play. What is it about the novel or prose that speaks to you? Are you still writing poetry?
No. No. See, I wish it, I just don't even ever want anybody to know that I ever wrote poetry. I wrote poetry when I started writing poetry when I was maybe 11. I was quite self-important. So when I was maybe 13, I had my mother type up a manuscript called My Anthology of 100 Poems. So, no, I'm not a poet. I read a lot of poetry, but I don't know why it is that prose is what speaks to me, but it is. Prose is, if there's such a thing as a vehicle for your dreams, then it's prose for me.
Merci. J'ai un message, mais je vais me faire traduire. I'm gonna work as a translator for her. But just before she starts, I want to thank you very much for being such a positive feminist role model for everybody all around the world, because you've been very, very inspiring.
Thank you.
So she'd also like to thank. She works as the responsible of the Office for Equality in the canton of Fribourg. But she'd like to say that they bought a large number of your books in French and German. With the aim to distribute them to most young people here aged 14, 15. And to hold a creative writing contest. How to achieve men-women equality from this work.
I'm sorry, you have to read my book. No, I'm joking. Sorry, my brother is always telling me that my brother is like, you would be a failed comedian, stop trying. But I can't help myself, I keep trying. That's actually really lovely to hear. And I've been thinking a lot about young people, and I think in general, we have this very positive view of the young, and we say, oh, things will get better when older people who are poisoned by all kinds of bigotry and prejudice die out. But increasingly, I don't think that's true at all. I think that young people are just as susceptible to the prejudices in our society. And in talking to young people, sometimes I'm shocked because I think, my God, you still believe this sort of thing? You still believe? And I'm interested in boys in particular because, I think feminism has to engage with boys and men. And I find that while I'm very familiar with the stories of young girls, I kind of feel that I know what the pressure points are. I kind of feel that I know what the difficulties are. I want to know what it is for boys. So I think it would be good in having those conversations, sometimes to separate them, because I think sometimes peer pressure makes young people not really say what they think. And girls are socialized to perform for boys. Boys are socialized to perform for girls to an extent. What I would say to them is be honest. Talk about what you really think about these things. And I think it's important for adults to then step in without judgment, right? I find that for many young people, there might be a young boy who thinks, oh, girls are whatever. It's not so much that that young boy is a bad person. It's because he lives in a society that is steeped in misogyny. And so for me, it's a question of challenging the stereotypes about girls that boys have, but doing it in a way that isn't about, you're so bad. Because I think if we catch them young, there is hope. And that there are ways to do it. I really believe in storytelling. and to ask them to tell stories. So you really think that girls are not as intelligent or as clever, or girls should, do you have any stories in your life that show you that? And then to show them stories that challenge that. I really think that stories help people to start to see things in a way that theory really doesn't, especially when you're that young. So I think it would be, and then to ask girls, and also to let girls know, I sometimes think that girls carry a heavy burden of growing up in a world that is so misogynistic. And then we also tell them, oh, be strong, you can be the best that you can. But they're living in a world that isn't structured to tell them that they're strong. So now they're carrying that burden. And I think it's important in talking to young girls to let them know, your femaleness is not your fault, right? The way that the world has socialized you is not your fault. For all of us, feminism is about unlearning. I'm still unlearning. Never mind that I'm supposed to be a feminist icon. But there are things that I sometimes roll my eyes at that. But there are things that I was taught and that, seeped under my skin, that even though intellectually I reject them, I'm still doing the emotional battle. This tendency to be guilty for wanting things for yourself, I think is something that women across the world, across cultures, we're socialized to think of ourselves as caregivers. So we put ourselves last all the time. And I find that I'm still kind of struggling with that. I was in Spain maybe a week ago, and this woman said to me, you are the most visible, I think she said, visible female, you're the best known female writer from Africa. And she said, what do you think about that? And I said to her, take out female. And but the thing, but here's the thing that happened right afterwards is that I started feeling ashamed of myself. And I said to her, something is just happening to me right now. My female socialization is kicking in, where I am now ashamed of having claimed what is mine. And this, I think it's such a thing. You talk to girls who are 7 years old, and they've already learned that. Now you talk to boys, and somehow it's the opposite. Right? So I've read all of these studies about how boys are not as clever as they think they are. And girls, it's true. You could kind of look at the studies that have been replicated across cultures. And girls are cleverer than they think they are. We need to try and balance that out so that we get to a middle ground for both. And I think the way to do it is to make young people feel that it's a safe space. They can really say what they think, even if what they think is not the party line, because that's the only way we can start to challenge it. But thank you. This actually makes me very happy.
I love your hair too.
And yours?
I'm a primary school teacher for 4th to 6th graders, and right now we are writing stories. And when they stop writing, I'm very proud that I got them to be motivated about writing. But now we are at the point where the children are finished and they give me the text, and sometimes it's just a mess. So I try to tell them that there is always a reader, so it's important to revise the text, but they are not really into it right now, or not yet. So do you have advice what I can tell them to do? So why it is important to revise the text?
Bribe them. With the grades 4 to 6. So what are they, like 9?
10.
10? 10 to 12. What's a good bribe for that age? I guess candy doesn't work anymore. No, in general, I kind of believe in a certain kind of bribery for young people. Maybe, but they're young. I think you just telling them at this point is a good thing, because in general, I think about when you were 10. I don't know if you were as annoying as I was, but when I was 10, I thought I knew it all. I thought my teachers had no idea what they were talking about. And then I turned maybe 21, and suddenly I thought, my God, my teacher was right. So I think what's important is for the children to hear it. You might not think that they're taking it in, but trust me, the students of yours, when they're 21, they will be revising their work properly because they had you. It's true. I had a fantastic teacher in grade 5 and really wonderful woman, Mrs. Carlo. And sometimes I thought, she doesn't really know what she's saying. But I'm still using Mrs. Carlo's lessons today, and I am 42 years old. So, you know.
Good evening.
Hello.
I have no question at all. I just want to say thank you for being you, because you inspire so many women, especially black women, and so many young ladies. And I was so excited to be here, and I'm so glad that I joined the Basel to here. Since 3 months.
Oh, whoa.
I'm really so moved by what you say, how you talk, just everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have another.
Your hair is gorgeous.
So I want to say thank you, but also congratulations, because to get this type of audience in America, they would be like, you tried. But like for Switzerland, and yeah, so what you were talking about in terms of your postgraduate experience, I really related to that on like a spiritual level. So I'm also doing a master's in African studies, and I don't have a social science background. And I think I also find myself feeling a bit imprisoned with this jargon thing. So I just want to know, how did you survive it? And also kind of, also, do you ever read the stuff that African studies scholars write about you? Because I feel like
That's a good question.
you have, like, your work has become part of their research. I'm just curious about what you think.
No, in general, in the past few years, I haven't really read a lot of academic writing. I guess for the reasons that I said earlier, which is half the time I don't know what's being said. I know some African academics, so no, really the honest answer to your question is no. I haven't really read. I also don't want to read about myself and my work. It's a strange thing. I don't read reviews. I haven't read reviews since Purple Hibiscus. So I mean, academic writing is a bit different because you're less likely to get annoyed by it. Because, reviews, you get annoyed. Even if it's a fantastic review and has one line that says something was bad, you're like... So this is the other thing I would say to any writer starting out: try to start very early, not to read reviews, because it really will help you in. Because if you believe the good, you have to believe the bad, and it can really mess with your head. And I think it also helps you to stay true to your artistic vision, because if somebody is telling you, "Oh, you do ABC well," they tell you that 2 times. When you're writing, you start thinking, "Oh, I do ABC well, so I better do ABC." I find that the 2 reviews I read of Purple Hibiscus, I still remember word for word, and that's very bad. So academic writing, no, not really. I haven't read any. But I've been to some conferences. I went to the African Literature Association conference this year. Actually, it was really fun, really interesting. How did I survive? I didn't. That's the point. I really didn't. And I have to say that the problem was not the program. I went to a very good program. I went to Yale. Yale has, and the archives are fantastic. What I liked the most was just being able to go to the library and look at old things. The classes did not work for me. So the problem there wasn't anything particularly wrong with the program. The program was just a very good American program in the way that contemporary academia is. I just was not a good fit for it. And so I didn't survive. I was miserable. I really was, because I think part of it is also that maybe I kind of I went back to school because I wanted to learn, in particular, about pre-colonial West Africa. It's something I'm very interested in. I want to know where we came from so that I understand why we are where we are. And the history that I'm familiar with started with colonialism. And And that's important, obviously, but I want to know what happened before, because I think that's really the root for us Africans. We need to know who we were before somebody started telling us who we were. And I didn't really get that because I found that I took classes in which we were applying theories to things. I remember in particular class about the war in Sierra Leone, which obviously is contemporary, and I wanted to know, what happened, but instead we're like, this Columbia professor posits that the theory of war is this. Let's apply it to Sierra Leone. I was like, I don't fucking care about applying it to Sierra Leone. Can we just know what happened in Sierra Leone? I mean, so it then becomes this thing where I felt that many of us were very versed in a kind of almost highfalutin language of academia, but sometimes I worried that we didn't even know the basics. I worried that, also in studying Liberia, I was like, I'll be in a seminar and I'd be like, do you people really know what Samuel Doe stood for? You know what I mean? We're applying all these theories, but yeah. So no, I didn't survive. I'm sorry, I wish I could be more positive, but I'm not going to lie. Yeah. If he works for you, do it. Doesn't, yeah.
I'm afraid I think we have to finish questions there. We've invited...
can I take one more? Can I take
of course.
one more? Yeah.
If you'd like one more.
There was
who did you... You've made a problem now for yourself. Okay, from this side.
This is true. There's a young sister in the beret. She's occupying her space.
I wanted to thank you so much. This is very historical for a lot of us. I went to university here, so I'm really touched to be able to ask you this next question. I wanted to know how decolonial Afrofeminist theory informs your practice, especially being an African woman, and how feminism has always been a very particular question in our conversations about its birth, basically. So I wanted to know in what ways does it inform your work?
Well, in general, my feeling is that, and it's important to repeat this over and over, that feminism, that the Western world does not have a monopoly on feminism. But because the most documented feminist movements are Western, really American, and partly British. So we know about the suffragettes, and then we know about the American first wave and second wave and all of those things. But because those are the most documented strains of feminism, it somehow often seems to be the only. And so, which is why I often say that I became a feminist, not because I read any feminist texts, but because I grew up in Nigeria and I watched the world. And because I heard stories of my great-grandmother, who was a feminist. And she was a feminist because they called her a troublemaker, because she refused to accept certain things about the society she lived in and where it had placed women. And maybe it's also why, in general, and maybe this is a bit linked to the question about academia, I'm often, I'm not enthusiastic about feminist theory. But really, I should say, I'm not enthusiastic about theory. I know this is a terrible place to say it in a university. I think theory has its uses in the way that it can give us a language to think about things, and in the way it can help us to, but you know, my approach to life is that of a creative person. I'm a storyteller. And because I'm a storyteller, theory can very often clash with the messiness of human beings. I'm interested instead in women who are feminists but still have misogyny in their blood, because we live in a misogynistic world. But if we're theorizing feminism, there's hardly room for that. And also for me, you know, feminism is worldwide. Every culture, everywhere in the world has women. There are women there who have resisted, who have said no, who have pushed back, and who have faced consequences for it. I think of myself as part of a kind of global historical movement that isn't limited to first wave and second wave. I think of my feminism as rooted in a certain kind of Africanness, because that's why I became feminist. I became feminist because we went to the village in Anambra State in southeastern Nigeria, and they told me I couldn't see certain interesting masquerades because I was a girl. And so, as a 6-year-old, I had rage because I just felt that this made no sense. That's how I became a feminist. But I think that this kind of experience isn't necessarily captured in certain Western-centric feminist debates. But at the same time, you use an expression, I think you said Afro. Yes. Can you define that for me?
Oh, yeah. For me, Afrofeminism, of course, I cannot define it out of its context, which is America, which is a feminism that is intersectional, first and foremost, which takes into account sexism, racism, classicism, and ageism. So that's the practice that I'm talking about, basically. But I'm talking about a practice that is definitely was created by Afro-American women.
You see, the thing for me is, and even so intersectional has also, I think, become the kind of buzzword that I find myself wanting to constantly question, and I think that it's come to mean all kinds of things. And I think I think that when Kimberly Crenshaw came up with intersectional, it's now being used in ways that I don't think she intended. So she was talking about really in terms of law, where the law wanted to separate people experiencing sexism and people experiencing racism, and Black women are like, hello, where do we fit in? I sometimes worry that there's a certain contemporary strain of academic discourse that wants feminism to be everything. And I'm going to tell you that I want feminism to be about women. There's somebody who said to me, if you're a feminist and you're not a climate activist, then you're not a feminist. And I just thought, we can be many things, right? We don't have to, and again, it worries me because I feel that there's a misogynistic strain to this kind of thinking, where again, the burden is on women to take on every damn thing. And so for me, feminism is about women. Climate activism is about the climate. Do you see what I mean? So, and I sometimes worry that when we start talking about intersectional, it's in a way, it feels to me that it waters down the focus on women. And so I don't even use that language because I've found that people have used it in all kinds of ways that I don't agree with. And so my asking you to define Afrofeminism, which maybe is kind of similar to womanism.
To a certain extent, although I do believe that womanism takes into account a more spiritual aspect of joint identities and collective consciousness of Afro descendants that experience a certain solidarity. I wouldn't talk about the oppression, but I'll talk about like Afro women's solidarity when it comes to their views of feminism.
But here's the thing. My thing is, Western feminism has a history of racism, right? Actually, maybe also partly present racism. And I feel as though that still hasn't really been acknowledged. And so I'll tell you the other worry I have about this intersectional. Sometimes it can feel like window dressing. So in American feminist circles, I often find people now, many white women saying, white feminism is terrible. I don't even know what that means. And often it's white women saying that. Or when white women are asked about feminism, they go, oh, we should talk to Black women. I don't know, it feels to me performative. And the storyteller in me doesn't trust that. I don't trust it. What I would like is to have a kind of feminism that acknowledges difference, that acknowledges that there are ways in which we experience sexism differently, but that there are ways in which, because we are women, there are things that are similar and universal. I think, for example, that okay, so here's an example. I remember reading a review. A white feminist woman wrote a book about feminism. And there was a review written by another white woman. But the review was like, how terrible. All she writes about is being a white feminist. And somehow this was seen as valid criticism, but she was a white woman. So I sometimes worry also that intersectional means that people can no longer tell their stories. I don't want a white feminist to tell the story of Black women. I want to know what her experience as a white feminist is. But the thing is that feminism should make room so that we also hear the stories of other kinds of feminists, rather than insisting that one bucket somehow fits in everyone and that we fail to acknowledge difference. That's, in general, how I kind of feel about it. So you probably won't hear intersectional come out of my mouth at any time.
Are you happy to read a little bit? Okay.
So I'm going to read another section that was selected for me. I think I'll just read here, if that's all right.
As you prefer.
The blood days crawled into one another. Olanna grasped for thoughts, for things to do. The first time Odenibo came to her flat, she was unsure whether to let him in. But he knocked and said, Nkem, please open. Biko, please open, until she did. She sat sipping some water while he told her that he had been drunk, that Amala had forced herself on him, that it had been a brief, rash lust. Afterwards, she told him to get out. It was grating that he remained self-assured enough to call what he had done a brief, rash lust. She hated that expression, and she hated the firmness of his tone the next time he came and said, "It meant nothing, Nkem, nothing." What mattered to her was not what it meant, but what had happened. His sleeping with his mother's village girl after only 3 weeks away from her. It seemed too easy, the way he had broken her trust. She decided to go to Kano, because if there was a place where she could think clearly, it was in Kano. Her flight stopped first in Lagos, and as she sat waiting in the lounge, a tall, thin woman hurried past. She stood up and was about to call out, "Kainene," when she realized it could not be. Kainene was darker skinned than the woman and would never wear a green skirt with a red blouse. She wished so much that it were Kainene, though. They would sit next to each other, and she would tell Kainene about Odenibo, and Kainene would say something clever and sarcastic and comforting all at once. In Kano, Arize was furious. That man is a wild animal from Abba. His rotted penis will fall off soon. Doesn't he know he should wake up every morning and kneel down and thank his God that you looked at him at all? She said, while showing Olanna sketches of Buffon wedding gowns. Nakwanze had finally proposed. Olanna looked at the drawings. She thought them all to be ugly and over-designed, but she was so pleased by the rage felt on her behalf that she pointed at one of them and murmured, "It's lovely." Auntie Feka said nothing about Odenibo until a few days had passed. Olanna was sitting on the veranda with her. The sun was fierce, and the zinc awning crackled as if in protest. But it was cooler here than in the smoke-filled kitchen, where 3 neighbors were cooking at the same time. Olanna fanned herself with a small raffia mat. 2 women were standing near the gate, one shouting in Igbo, "I said you will give me my money today, Tata. Today, not tomorrow. You heard me say so because I did not speak with water in my mouth." While the other made pleading gestures with her hands and glanced skyward. "How are you?" Auntie Feka asked. She was stirring a paste of ground beans in a mortar. "I'm fine, Auntie. I'm finer for being here." Auntie Feka reached inside the paste to pick out a small black insect. Olanna fanned herself faster. Auntie Feka's silence made her want to say more. "Auntie, I think I will postpone my program at Nsukka and stay here in Kano," she said. "I could teach a while at the institute." "No." Auntie Feka put the pestle down. "No, Mba. You will go back to Nsukka." But Auntie, I can't just go back to his house. I'm not asking you to go back to his house. I said you will go back to Nsukka. Do you not have your own flat and your own job? Odemibo has done what all men do and has inserted his penis in the first hole he could find when you were away. Does that mean that somebody died? Olanna had stopped fanning herself and could feel the sweaty wetness on her scalp. When your uncle first married me, I worried because I thought those women outside would come and displace me from my home. I now know that nothing he does will make my life change. My life will change only if I want it to change. What are you saying, Auntie? He's very careful now, since he realized that I am no longer afraid. I have told him that if he brings disgrace to me in any way, I will cut off that snake between his legs. Auntie Feka went back to her staring, and Olanna's image of their marriage began to come apart at the seams. Olanna, you must never behave as if your life belongs to a man. Do you hear me? Auntie Feka said. Your life belongs to you and you alone. Sosogi. You will go back on Saturday. Let me hurry up and make some abacha for you to take. She tasted a little of the paste and spat it out.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very brief word of thanks. When I think of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's novels, especially Purple Hibiscus, which is my favorite, I think of laughter. At Auntie Ifeoma's house, a house of refuge and freedom, there is always laughter. At the novel's end, though there is sadness, there is also something deep inside your belly that would rise up to your throat and come out as a freedom song, as laughter. There are plenty of things to be angry or anxious about, and we've touched on some of them this evening. Climate disaster, race, gender discrimination. And as we know, our guest has many profound things to say about these. But in her novels, she shows us laughter too. And laughter keeps us sane and hopeful, and it shows us that our brains are switched on. Laughter is an assertion of strength. Medieval people laughed at the devil to show that he had no power over them. And we can laugh at our own mistakes and our own weaknesses, and in that way free ourselves from their power. If we can laugh with someone else, we can build with them a human bond, even if they have been our enemy. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, in her novels, in her political speeches, and I think you will all agree tonight here as well, has modeled a gracious, positive, good-humored way of challenging bad things. A way that can persuade others to fight with us rather than against us. We should, as she says, all be feminists. And if we're all working together, we will need to be able to laugh. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.